Let's go live. Good evening, everybody from the UK, and I hope you're having a beautiful time out there. I tell you what, it's sunny here, and it's been hot for the last few weeks. And you know me, I do not like the hot weather really at all. But I have got a really nice guest on today, and we've got Linda, and say hello to say hello, Linda.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. It's warm here as well.
Brilliant. And where do you come from? I know you come from the United States. Whereabouts in the United States are you?
I'm right in the heart of the country, Springfield, Missouri.
Beautiful place, that is. Beautiful place. And thank you very much. So tell us about yourself. Tell us, we know that you're an author, and we'll go through all that in a minute. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm a farm girl. I grew up here in the Ozarks on a farm. So simple life, just an ordinary world for me. And then I went into real estate, became a real estate investor. That was my bread and butter. Did quite successful with that. Got involved in some meditative type classes and began to develop more of my intuitive abilities and started teaching those as well. And I used a lot of that kind of inner insight with the real estate investing I did. Now, that's what my latest book is about, Spy Your Way to Power and Success, is about utilizing that kind of centeredness, that kind of inner knowing that your body has, that you can trust whenever you're, whether it's business, relationships, no matter what it is, being able to use that in your life just as a good guide. So that was in a nutshell. I also have a podcast, and it's on cryptids, of all things. But that kind of just was handed to me, wasn't necessarily an interest I had, but it was handed to me. So I went with it, and now I have a really good following. I have yet another podcast, which has a lot of more spiritual type of interviews that I do. It's a much smaller podcast, however, and I travel the country. I have a lot of classes that I do. I do lectures at universities and sometimes medical institutions. I used to do that more than I do today, but that's kind of my life in a nutshell, kind of hits the highlights. I also am a documentary filmmaker.
Yes, and that's where we please let's kind of like go to the documentaries that you've made. What made you go into that? Was it one day you woke up and thought, well, today I'm going to make a documentary about this or a different subject? What made you do that? What made you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, several things happened. First of all, in 2013, my mother had a stroke and required 24/7 care after that. And she came to live with me for quite a while until she was able to get back on the farm where my dad was living. But we still had to have 24/7 care. And so at that time, I was in charge of, the aides that came in to help, the financial situation that they were in to pay those aides. As well as I was managing my own real estate investments, still buying and selling property, and had several rentals, along with the intuitive business I was doing. That intuitive business had to be put on hold, however, because I just wasn't able to travel anymore. I wasn't able to get away much at all. But in 2015, my father passed. 2017, my mother passed. And at that point, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I was grieving the loss of both my parents, of course. And I thought, what have I not done yet in my life? I've done so many things. I've been a really privileged person to be able to just embark on radio shows. And, I had a TV show for a time, and I traveled the country speaking. I'd written several books at that point. And, it's like, well, what have I not yet done? What would I like to do? I'd started the Midwest Research Society, where we took people traveling all over the country to see, exotic sites and
Mm.
various things. And so I'm sitting there and thinking, okay, with the time left in my life, what's my bucket list look like? What do I really want to accomplish? And the thing that it boiled down to is I've always wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to educate myself on what do I need to purchase. I don't know the first thing about doing this. So I got all the equipment necessary, met someone who was very good at editing and also with camera work. And so the first thing we did was just a little simple reality TV show, kind of a sitcom kind of reality TV show. And that sort of broke the a barrier of not knowing what I was doing, even though I still didn't know much about what I was doing. But I was learning, I was learning, and it was a tough go because there were times when I would look at what we had created and think, this
Yeah.
is just missing so much. And I would bring in specialists, that had a background in sound, or a specialist that had a background in editing, and just ask them to watch it and critique it and give me some kind of feedback. So we had focus groups that helped to develop that. It turned into a mediocre show, but it was still worthwhile to do. From there, I did a documentary about a cancer survivor, and that was far more serious. We did that, probably we did it over maybe 5 times, just because it never was quite what I wanted. At one time, I just gave it to someone else and said, here, you do it. They brought it back and said, well, this isn't what I want. So I'm going to have to just do it myself and get it edited the way that I really want it to be. So that one actually became a fairly successful
Yeah,
documentary.
yeah, yeah.
And then I went on to do a documentary about a World War II veteran. And it was more of a personal interest story because it involved a painting, and it involved, some really interesting meetings long after the war. And so that one was also fairly successful. So I really liked doing that. And then my cryptid YouTube channel took off, which I didn't even
Yeah.
know that it would. I probably wouldn't have stayed with that had it not. But I made several documentaries around that. I did one with Scott Nelson,
All
and that
right.
can be seen on my Linda Eastburn YouTube channel, Scott Nelson, the linguist, and that one was really successful. And then I did a movie, call it a documentary on the Niagara River here on Bigfoot, because there's so many tales. And we did find some evidence out there. We weren't really looking so much to prove that Bigfoot exists there, but it was a really interesting kind of nature piece as well. So I did that one and just really loved it. But I got sidetracked with writing a couple more books, and I started speaking again at conferences. And so I haven't gotten back to the documentary filmmaking since then, but I loved it. I dearly, dearly loved it.
Yeah. Be- Barefoot. Let's get back to that because I find that interesting. I believe that barefoot is true. Many people think it's just a myth. It's nothing more than a myth. Um, can you tell us what evidence that you have, which you can tell my listeners about barefoot?
Well, of course, most of them, I've got 500 interviews behind me at this point with people who have had some form of an encounter or seen evidence or researcher or something like that. And, after that period of time, you begin to understand that, well, not all these people could just be making up the story. So they're seeing something. The movie that we made, Byways of Bigfoot, which is also on my YouTube channel, it was something that I really didn't expect to find that much evidence. We were just going through nature, and we hit 3 different locations. One was at a nature reserve location. We found some really unusual prints there, along with some unusual tree twists that were side by side. So that was interesting. We also found some scratch marks way high up on a tree that I don't think a bear could have done. There's nothing else here in our neck of the woods that I think could have scratched that off, but they were really big scratch marks. The next place we went was along the river, the Niagara River itself, and there's a kind of an area that's some distance from the river, but it's a cliff area. And back in that area, it's really difficult to maneuver through. But we were walking through that area looking for whatever we could find. And we found a barefoot footprint in kind of a soft dirt mud area. It was cold out. I don't think a human being would have been back there walking around. It looked fresh. And there was a tree limb that was twisted, not broken, but twisted also beside that. So that was kind of an unusual find there, whether it was a human being or not. It was a rather large footprint. Then we went to some private property along the river, and we found several things there. We found some trackways. We found some unusual bushes that were all bedded down. It wasn't water that had caused them to go down because it was against the flow. It would have gone the other direction than the direction they went because it was down a hill. It's much larger than a deer camp would have been there. These were huge beds. So we found that. We found another area with tracks as well. And this man had several, not encounters, But he had some odd things left on his porch. He had these little skulls left on his porch. He had one day he had some just an odd and things from the farm brought up to his porch and left, which is kind of strange. So we put out some boxes that would be very difficult for anyone or anything unless you had the dexterity of a thumb and fingers. So we put those boxes out with peanut butter and some protein bars and things in them. They sat there for quite a while, but eventually something got them down. Something was able to open up the box and get into the peanut butter. So that's the only evidence we got on that film, but still that was way more than I was anticipating we would find.
Yeah, and when you found it, the evidence. Did you actually report the evidence, or what happens? What happens? Because there's a lot of people say, yeah, there's a barefoot, and some people say it's not. So do you get all the evidence, pick up all the evidence, and then take it to your authorities? What happens with it?
Well, I don't know that we had enough to really report anything. We just had images or pictures of it, and it's all reported in the film itself. But there wasn't enough evidence to really say, okay, yeah, we can definitively say this was Bigfoot. And, we do believe that Bigfoot's here. Now, there have been reports along that river, however, of people that have actually had face-to-face encounters with Bigfoot. So those reports are out there. That's one of the reasons we chose that area to do the film, because it did have reports of Bigfoot in that vicinity.
Right. Okay. Now, also your documentary about this war veteran. Now, um, I was amazed by that, because of the way you kind of like how it was edited, and also it showed some kind of like true passion behind it.
It did, yeah. That was one that came to me. The nephew of the vet contacted me and said, "Hey, I've got this story," and they had put it before some really prominent news people, and they were willing to look at it, but they wanted the family to do all the vetting, and they wanted the family to basically write the story for them. And they just didn't have the time or the know-how or whatever. So he brought
Yeah.
it to me to see if I would consider putting this together as a documentary. And when I heard the story, it was a really fascinating thing. It has some twists and turns in it, no doubt about that. So I contacted as many people as I could. It involves a painting that was produced back in that day and during World War II. And it's at the Pentagon now here in the U.S. I even contacted the Pentagon to see if we could come look at it, maybe utilize it in some way or travel with the release of the film. They found it. They were not willing to allow us to come and utilize it. They said they didn't know the condition of it necessarily, but in the documentation, they knew where it was. Um, the painter of that painting was already deceased, and he was from the UK actually. So
All
I could
right.
not get in touch with him, and we tried every way possible to get in touch with his widow. I could not find her either. So that was an interesting pursuit. It was a fascinating process to learn all of the work behind making a documentary, because you can't just stick anything and everything out there in the film. You have to have permission to use things. There's copyright laws, and there's all kinds of things that you have to jump through those hoops and make certain that you're doing things correctly. So yeah, that was an interesting story. We got a historian on track because I wasn't a World War II expert. But we had an historian came on. He was on the film. The nephew was willing to help tell the story. The family was just wonderful. They all provided, pictures and images throughout the time. We bought a lot of footage of World War II so we could, intermittently put in real live, scenes from World War II, and then the surprise ending, which I'm not going to tell you what that was. You have to watch the film, but it's called Encounters with the Enemy, and it was a fun film to make. I really enjoyed it.
Right. Okay. I will get on top of that. The painter you said that was over in the UK. He wasn't from Plymouth, Devon, was he?
I don't remember the name right off. I'd have to look that up, but He painted an image of a German warplane and a U.S. plane, and the U.S. plane was shot and it was falling from the sky. And there was a German general who had commissioned this painting to be painted, and the German general was actually flying the plane that shot down the U.S. plane. So that's the painting that was there. You can still find prints of it. We did find an excellent print and purchased that, but I would love to have seen the original painting.
Yes, yeah. Um, you do have some interesting stories, and the books you have. I've ordered a couple today, so hopefully when that does get you, I've got more knowledge about you. I have looked into you about your filmmaking and what you do and what you do on YouTube. What makes you what makes a person like you, what you achieved, a better person. What does it, you know you must everybody's got a story in life. So tell us, what have you achieved more, and what have you conquered out of everything?
Well, one of the things I can say is, of course, having started investing in real estate really early, and being quite successful with that, it enabled me to have the funds to do a lot of the other things that I did. So I'm self-published with the books. I'm self-published with all of the documentaries I do. I fund the monies behind all of that, so that helps a great deal. I think it's the creative spirit in me, however, that ventures out and does things. Continue to learn new things, and just being willing to jump into it without any knowledge of it, being able to totally fail with a couple of things before
Yes.
moving on to something that you can succeed with. And I can say wasn't until the last film we made, The Encounter with the Enemy, that I began to understand the dance that takes place in any kind of film work, the ebb and flow of the perfect timing with things, that if it's off, you lose your audience. It becomes boring. If you do it too fast, you lose your audience because they can't keep up with everything. So it's that, how do you play a scene out? How do you portray that? Get the scene to draw people in with just the right music, the right lighting, the right voice, to end something, to give people the time to process what just happened or sink in depth. It was a dance, and it wasn't until that last one we did that I understood that dance and was able to rhythmically, like my intuitive work that I do, rhythmically follow that and take it seriously and heed that rhythm that we were able to produce in that last film. That was a really interesting. It was an educational process, but it was an interesting creative process, almost like creating a painting.
Beautiful, beautiful. Um, Also, you've been a host of some television programs and shows and everything. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was back a ways. Back, I did just a cable TV show called Anomalies, and that went on to be on a radio syndicated show, Anomalies. That Ted Phillips, he was a UFO researcher, was on that show with me, and we interviewed so many people. Linda Moulton Howe was on our show. Stanton Friedman was on the show. Some of the remote viewers from the Stargate remote viewing program came on. We just had wonderful guests, just a great deal of them. But this was back in around 2002, 2003, something like that. Did that for about a year. That was great. And then I had an opportunity to leave, start working with a physicist. He was actually from Princeton, on some really getting down to the nitty gritties of some of the intuitive work that I was working on, and trying to understand some of the dynamics that might be taking place. And really, my last two books has some, well, Spy Your Way to Power and Success has some of that formula in there that we came up with, some of the explanations of some of the paranormal things that I had been exploring for some time, and being able to to help people understand that some of this phenomena is probably more natural than we realize. We just don't understand fully what's happening.
Right. I'm a Christian. I believe
Mhm.
I do believe in God. That's my faith. Um, Many people say to me, "Do I believe there is I was asked this the other day. Someone said to me, "Do you believe that there's people on other planets?" And I say, "Yes, I do." Then other people say, "Well, don't you think you're a bit silly?" See, because we don't know what's out there, do we? We don't know,
Right.
you know, we don't know what's out there. What do you think when someone comes to you and say, Linda, tell us about the universe. What's out there? What is there UFOs or is there anomalies and everything?
Well, I haven't seen anything, so I don't know for sure. I've talked to a lot of people that supposedly, has had some things, and Ted Phillips was a trace evidence researcher of something that had landed, a craft that had landed. So this wasn't hypothetical in his particular case. I haven't really seen anything. I saw an orange light one time. That's about it. And I too grew up Christian, and I understand that perspective and respect it highly. My parents were very devout Christians, and I just respect that a great deal. A lot of the things that I have done since my childhood and gone on into it is, I believe God is huge. The all
Yes.
present, all
Yeah,
knowing
yeah, yeah,
God.
yeah.
And so God became really big in my view at a certain point in time, and none of it conflicted with my early Christian teachings. It just broadened the perspective immensely. So is there such a thing as, peaceful UFOs that God also created? I think that's potentially possible. I don't know. There again, I'm not one who's experienced those things, but I am one who has talked to a lot of people in research that have had some really, really unusual experiences with them. The cryptids, those seem, a lot of people think of them as flesh and blood. Other people think of them as kind of fairy, like the fairy world.
Yeah,
So
well,
there again, I haven't seen one, so I don't know.
yeah, people say to me, if it's a God, where is he? And I say, well, can you see, can you see the wind?
Mhm.
That's what I say to them. So, or can you feel the wind? But the trouble is, you know, in your books and everything, there's a lot of kind of like you put a lot of hard work into these books, and also the television, everything that you said, you did, your programs you made. What's the biggest achievement in your life so far? Like you can say, wow, it stands out.
The most financial achievement, of course, was being successful with the real estate. But my intuition was with me so strongly on that and guided me so much, all the way. And there again, intuition is just our body's way of connecting with a higher knowing, a
Mm.
higher understanding in life, and that's been huge. The other thing is when I learned how to be more capable of being intuitive with other people, I understood that it was not my mind that was able to do that, it was the heart. And being able to be most compassionate in the world was the most advantageous thing for my well being and another person's well being that could possibly exist. And so that achievement was just opening up my heart. And honestly, my intuition was very key in that I wasn't a compassionate person, but not to the degree that I became after that, because I could feel who they were and I could understand who they were and what they'd gone through and what brought them to that point. So I think it was a higher essence of love, and you could call that, I call it kind of a universal love, but you could call it God because I think it's one and the same.
Yeah, yeah. If you were kind of like, what can I say? If you had the chance to go back into your like child or your life, you know, what would you change?
Well, I would develop that intuition much earlier than I did. I was about
Mm,
40 when that all kind of opened up, and I started, really understanding more about it. Even though it was prominent when I was younger, I didn't give it the respect it probably deserved. But also, I don't think I understood who I was. There was a blind spot there
right.
of understanding
Okay.
a lot of myself. And if I could go back and explain to myself then what I learned after I was 40, about me, I would have probably lived more true to myself. The first, 40 years of my life, it was mostly just trying to get ahead, trying to work, trying to, just a pressured kind of moment. And really, life doesn't have to be that pressure. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be very, very easy, and I would probably let go and enjoyed it more. I'm not sure if I've lost you or what. You're not here. There you are.
No, there you go. We've lost
Yes.
you. Sorry, say that. Sorry. Repeat that again. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just saying I would probably, if I could go back and tell myself who I was after I was 40, I would have done so many more things earlier on in my life. But I didn't know who I was. I mean, I was just living life, and it was kind of the rat race of living life. And if I could, I would go back and probably enjoy it a lot more and realize it doesn't have to be that complicated or that difficult to do the things that you really want to do and still be secure in life.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm so sorry about that. Our system went down for a couple of seconds.
Sure.
Um, the with your kind of like your work, real estate, and everything, you know, um, the trouble is some people think they've got to have a lot of money to get into real estate. Now, is that right, or you don't need millions of pounds, just to go into real estate?
Well, we didn't have anything when we started. I remember working for a minimum wage job, saving enough money to buy a little two-bedroom house, and that was before I got married. And that little house, once I got married, we got that paid off in 2 years, and that kind of was our stable little place where we could borrow money to buy, our first little house, and then on and on and on. But we continually built on that. We were just really good at utilizing the selling process, take that money, pay off the rentals, and just stair step it up. So we lived in poverty for about 10 years doing that. And then once we arrived at a place where we could get, big lines of credit, the next 10 years was, stabilizing the business, buying, selling to other people as well.